Hello and welcome to the sixth lecture in temperature stress physiology. Today's lecture will be about plant stress responses, especially from the physiological point of view. We will go over some basics like types of stresses, biotic and abiotic, and then we will look at some plant strategies against these stresses, avoidance and tolerance. Then we will look at plant responses over time and we'll see the differences between acclimation and adaptation. We will follow that up with secondary metabolites, which include phenolics, alkaloids, and terpenoids. After that, we will go over some plant responses to abiotic stresses such as drought, flooding, oxidative stress, light stress, and gravity and touch. We will finish the lecture by discussing some responses to biotic stresses such as pathogens and wounding. Plants are still organisms, they can't run away, so whenever the environment changes around them, they have to change too. The environmental factors affecting a plant in a natural ecosystem can be classified into biotic and abiotic. Biotic factors refers to the interaction with other living organisms either directly or indirectly. Those factors are diverse and they include the influence of other plants, pathogens, predators, pollinators, and maybe human interventions such as selection and pollution. Abiotic factors refer to the interaction with non-living organisms, more precisely nutrients, water, light, and temperature. Plants, like all living systems, are homeostatic, meaning that they tend to adjust to stress to keep their balance and ensure survival. Plants adjust to changing environmental factors by exhibiting stress tolerance, such as building resilient structures able to stand the stress, or by avoiding the stress, such as making strategic changes in their life cycles to avoid the extreme conditions. The example shown in the figure shows a xerophyte cactus in A that developed tolerance to drought by changing its morphology. Figure B shows a honey mesquite plant that avoids drought with their taproots in the drought season. In Figure C, we can see Mojave Desert Star that is a desert ephemeral which flowers only after adequate rain. This is a good example on a plant following the avoidance strategy. In D, we can see an example on salt-tolerant spinach plants that got acclimated to osmotic stress. And lastly, we can see a black spruce tree in Figure E that developed freezing tolerance. Plants' adjustment to stress can be classified based on time of exposure to two categories, adaptation and acclimation. This table summarizes the differences between the two terms. Adaptation is generally a process that affects an entire population. The stress tolerance traits that the plant developed take generations to show. Those are results of chronic long-lasting stresses. The changes or adaptations that the plant developed are products of mutations that allowed for natural selection and thus survival of these species. The change is reversible since it's a mutation, and the response is mostly plastic, meaning that it will not go back into the original state after the stress is gone. Adaptation is considered a strategic development since plants are expecting the stress in their life cycle. Acclimation, on the other hand, affects separate individuals due to stress exposure that doesn't last more than a generation, so no genetic changes are inherited. The duration of the stress can be for a short term or a long term. When the stress is only short term, plants adjust by altering their metabolism and physiology without changing their gene expression, such as closing the plant's stomata on a hot day. If the stress is relatively long term and lasts up to weeks or months, plants change their patterns of gene expression without changing their genes. An example of this is developing taproots to look for new water resources during drought. Acclimation is considered to have tactical responses since it is an outcome of unexpected stresses. Acclimation does not alter the genome, so it's not heritable and is reversible. Plant responses are described to be elastic, as the plant's physiology will go back to its original state after the stress is gone. This diagram shows us an overview of the homeostasis process. When a plant suffers from biotic or abiotic stress, a strain is invoked on the plant that will cause elastic or plastic or failure responses. The response that the plant will exhibit is determined by the adaptive or acclimatory capacity of the plant or population. It is also important to note that the responses exhibited by the plant when experiencing a stress depend on the severity and duration of the stress, stage of development, tissue type, and interaction between multiple stresses. Here is an interesting video showing an example on plants' adaptation in two extreme environments.
In some parts of the world, the beauty of winter masks the stress it poses for plants. During this season, sunlight is scarce, temperatures plunge, and soil often becomes hard with ice. Plants here get ready for these conditions in the fall, when most begin to lose their green color. They stop making new chlorophyll, the chemical needed to produce food. As the old chlorophyll breaks down, the color of leaves begins to change. Deciduous trees shed their leaves each year and remain inactive until spring, kind of like bears in hibernation. But conifers are hardy adapters to all kinds of environments. Their flexible branches bend as snow accumulates, dropping loads of snow to the ground below. Most have small, leathery leaves, shaped like scales or needles. A waxy coating keeps moisture in and guards against ice. The narrow shape of needles lets the wind and snow pass between them and prevents them from drying out. Since many conifers don't lose their leaves, they are ready to produce food as soon as spring arrives. Other plants have to grow new leaves all over again. In some of the hottest places on Earth, cactus plants withstand unforgiving conditions. The giant saguaro cactus lives in the Sonoran Desert in the southwest United States. Here, temperatures climb to more than 100 degrees, and less than 4 inches of rain falls each year. With plenty of sun, they get the energy they need, but water is a much different story. To collect moisture, they rely on a network of wide-spreading roots that cover large areas of the desert ground. They grow a good distance apart from each other as a result. Their tough, rubbery outer layer helps them store any moisture for months at a time. For a short time during the spring, the saguaro produces white blossoms. These buds open at night, providing a feast for long-nosed bats. The bats feed on the flowers and pollinate the cacti at the same time. This allows energy-rich fruit to form. Its seeds will feed all kinds of desert animals. These cacti reach heights of up to 50 feet and can live for almost 300 years. Surprisingly, their biggest threat isn't the heat at all. It comes from cities that are expanding nearby.
Plants make all the organic materials that is required for their survival within their cells. The metabolites a plant produces are classified into primary and secondary metabolites. Primary metabolites are chemical, intermediate, and plant end products that are directly involved in growth. Those include sugars, nucleotides, amino acids, and many more. Secondary metabolites are organic compounds that do not participate in primary metabolism, but have recently shown to play important roles in plant stress acclimation and adaptation. In the next slides, we will go over the three major groups of secondary metabolites. Those are phenolics, alkaloids, and terpenoids. Phenolics are a large group of organic compounds that share a similar feature, which is a phenyl ring in their basic structure. Lignin, a cell wall component, is an example of a phenolic compound. Lignin is a structural phenolic that played an important role in plants' evolution from their aquatic ancestors. Another example of phenolic compounds is suberin, which is found in plants' cork, bark, leaves, and roots. It assists suberization process in tissues by depositing suberin in the cell wall of the plant to protect them from water loss and pathogens. The last example of phenolics are flavonoids, which are the most diverse group of phenolics, counting over 4,500 compounds. Anthocyanins are a type of flavonoids that are responsible for plant organ pigmentation. Isoflavonoids are also part of the flavonoid family and are responsible for defense signaling. Figure A shows a phenyl ring, which is considered the parent structure for all phenolics. Figure B shows the skeletal structure of the phenylpropanoid compounds. Figure C shows phenylpropanoid acetate, which is an important precursor of the flavonoids. Figure D shows lignin, which is a phenolic related to lignin. And figure E represents a flavonoid called quercetin. Notice that flavonoids are composed of a phenol and acetate-derived rings. Most phenolics are derived from phenylalanine or tyrosine amino acids. Next, we will go over alkaloids. Alkaloids are an interesting group of secondary metabolites. Nicotine, caffeine, and opium are some examples of alkaloid compounds. Generally speaking, plants deploy alkaloids as antibiotics, herbivore deterrents, or other measures against biotic stresses. Yet interestingly, humans use those compounds extensively in their diets and medicines. An example on this is nicotine, shown in the figure, which is produced by Nicotiana tabacum as a potent insecticide against predators. Another example is caffeine, which is found in the leaves and seeds of cocoa, coffee, and tea plants. It is used by the plants as a chemical defense system against insects. This table also lists the major plant-derived alkaloids used in modern medicine. Examples include cocaine, codeine, and morphine. Alkaloids can be constitutive, which means that they are present at all times, or be synthesized in response to stress. Most alkaloids are synthesized from tryptophan and tyrosine. The origin of the terpenoid's name comes from terpenes, which is the volatile constituent of terpentines. The basic skeleton for terpenoids is isoprene, which consists of the branch 5-carbon isopentane. An example of terpenoids is natural rubber, which consists of 11,000 to 20,000 repetitive units of isoprene. Terpenoids are present in special tissues, usually in specialized structures such as glandular trichomes, secretory cavities, resin ducts, and blisters. In conifer species, the rosin products play an important role in defense from insects. On the other hand, terpenoids can be emitted as essential oils from flower petals to attract pollinators. Terpenoids are synthesized from isopentenyl diphosphate (IPP) and its isomer dimethylallyl diphosphate (DMAPP). In the next set of slides, we will discuss the major abiotic stresses plants experience. We will go over drought, flooding, reactive oxygen, light, gravity, and touch. Temperature stresses will be covered in more details in the future modules. Drought and salinity have extreme destructive effects on plant cells. The video on the right will show the effect of salt water on the osmotic pressure inside the cell. This change is sudden, this is drastic, but usually plants start sensing the stress as water potential drops and starts following a tolerance strategy. One protective method plants developed against drought or water loss due to salinity is the osmotic adjustment process. Plants synthesize compounds that increase the osmotic concentration inside the cells, preventing water diffusion and dehydration damage. Monomeric sugars are an example of compatible solutes. The term compatible is used to refer to the source of those solutes. Solutes can originate from the vacuole or the cytosol. The solutes that originate from the vacuole are inorganic salts that can be processed by special vacuolar enzymes but would be lethal in the cytosol. The solutes originating from the cytosol are referred to as compatible solutes. In order for plants to maintain their osmotic pressure within the cells, it is important to control ion fluxes in and out of the cell. Sodium influx is mediated through voltage-independent non-specific cation channels that act to counteract the accumulation of sodium in the cytosol. Additionally, sodium proton antiports become active in the tonoplast to move cytosolic sodium to the vacuole. Acclimation to water loss is associated with changes in patterns of gene expression. We will cover the genetic aspect of this response in our next module, but for now, what we need to know on the physiological level is that plants produce osmolytes to control its osmotic pressure, and it also redistributes ions within the cells to control the ion influx. Flooding is another abiotic stress that affects cell osmotic pressure. Flooding causes the blockage of the entry of oxygen into the soil and the roots of the plant. Plants are obligate aerobes that need respiration to produce up to 32 moles of ATP per mole of hexose. In the absence of oxygen, the same hexose molecule will only yield 2 moles of ATP. Plants need to assure the production of ATP during short-term flooding, which causes the plants to shift to anaerobic metabolism. Long-term hypoxia can cause cell injury as a consequence of acidification of the cytosol, which will greatly affect protein synthesis and can cause mitochondrial degradation, which will eventually lead to cell death. Long-term adaptation to flooding includes some morphological changes, such as cell elongation to escape to the surface of the water. Another striking structural response to long-term flooding stress is differentiation of the parenchyma, where continuous columnar intracellular spaces developed in the roots to facilitate the transport of oxygen from aerial structures to the root. Those are shown in the figure on the right. Reactive oxygen species, ROS, have multiple roles in plants. ROSs are substrates in a lot of biochemical reactions in the cell, such as formation of lignin. And as you remember in our previous lectures, hydrogen peroxide, which is a form of ROS, is a secondary messenger involved in signaling cascades in plants. However, reactive oxygen at higher concentrations can be destructive to lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins. The figure shows the major sources of oxidative stresses. Those include air pollution, oxidant-forming herbicides, heavy metals, drought, and excess light. Plant responses to oxidative stress depends on the source of the stress, but most responses are due to changes in gene expression. A plant is under light stress when it is unable to quench the light energy it is receiving either by way of photochemical or non-photochemical process. Overexcitation of chlorophyll causes the release of free radicals in the cytoplasm, which leads to photoinhibition. Photoinhibition is defined as decreased efficiency of photosynthesis as a result of oxidative injury caused by ROS. Inhibition is primarily in the photosystem II reaction center and occurs when system becomes light saturated. The inhibition is reversible to some degree and it depends on how adapted the plant is to varying light conditions. Tropism refers to directional growth in response to directional stimuli. Tropism is considered an adaptational response for plant survival. There are three types of tropism that differ in the stimuli that elicits the growth. Those are phototropism, which is elicited by light, thigmotropism, which is a result of touch stimuli, and gravitropism, which is a result of gravity force on the plant. Roots are positively gravitropic, growing in the direction of gravity pull, while shoots are negatively gravitropic. The response of tropism in general is a result of asymmetric elongation of plant cells on either sides of the organ. This is controlled by the gradients of auxins in the tissue. Roots sense gravity through starch granule sedimentation in the amyloplasts of the root cap. The left figure shows that starch granule sedimentation affects auxin distribution, and growth is promoted on the lateral side with the less auxin concentration. Shoots and tendrils of climbing plants sense their growth direction through touch, as shown in the figure on the right. The touch sensor in thigmotropism triggers growth through calcium signaling networks. And lastly, we will cover some of the biotic stresses that plants can suffer from. We will discuss wounding and pathogen stresses. Since plants have sugar that is an important source of energy for organisms, they are a constant target for pathogens. Pathogens are defined as organisms that must grow inside or on the plant to complete a part or all of their life cycle. This will definitely have a negative effect on the host. Pathogens enter the plant cell in different ways. Some enter through the stomata or lenticles, others through previous wounds, and some even directly penetrate the epidermis either mechanically or by enzymatic attack. The table shown here shows the different types of pathogens based on their attack strategies, host range, and specific features of interaction. In response to pathogen attack, plants try to defend themselves through constitutive defense, where some antimicrobial compounds are synthesized before pathogens attack. However, pathogen stress and infection induces additional antipathogen defense systems. This is referred to by induced defense response. The figure shows the immediate, local, and systematic response of plants to pathogens. Phytoalexins are an example of secondary metabolite that undergoes production increase after pathogen attack. Phytoalexins have antimicrobial properties that are rapidly synthesized after microbial infection. Chewing by herbivores causes damage or wounding that triggers a complex signaling pathway. Wounding releases oligosaccharides from tissues and activates a number of stress responses genes. One of the outcomes of those genetic modifications is the production of proteinase inhibitors, PIs, which are small defense proteins that interfere with the invertebrate's digestive system, retarding its growth. By the end of this lecture, you should know the answers to the following questions. What is the difference between biotic and abiotic stresses? What are the strategies that plants follow to survive stress? What are the differences between acclimation and adaptation? What are plant secondary metabolites? And how do phenolics, alkaloids, and terpenoids assist in stress responses? Mention some physiological responses to abiotic and biotic stresses. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next lecture.